Have you ever wondered why some people get on with the things that they want and their passions, and others, no matter how smart, how capable, and how available the resources may be, they can't strike the match to start the fire? And so it was the title of this next book that inspired me to bring it to the channel. It is titled, Have You a Strong Will? Or How to Develop and Strengthen Willpower, Memory, or any other faculty or attribute of the mind by the easy process of self-hypnotism by Charles Godfrey Leland. This book also goes under a different title. The one that I'm bringing to the channel is the 5th edition. The new one, which I believe they were trying to bring it up to the more modern American flavor, is titled The Mystic Will, a method of developing and strengthening the faculties of the mind through the awakened will by a simple scientific process possible to any person of ordinary intelligence. And now, between you and I'm not sure that there was any ill intent by stating a person of ordinary intelligence. You may notice that some of the books that I bring to the channel may have a sense of wisdom that is imparted is timeless. It doesn't matter which era we move to. Each of these books contain a golden nugget, and one that is specific to each one of us. Depending on what we're going through in our lives, that's what will jump out to us. So with that intent to help us individually improve ourselves and hopefully get to those answers to the questions that we have, so that we can become better persons for ourselves, for our family, and for humanity. That is my intention, to bring some of these ancient and mystic wisdom. If you're new to my channel, welcome, and to our dear community and subscribers, thank you so much for your support, and welcome back. The book starts with a quote by Tennyson. "Oh, well for him whose will is strong." Preface. During the past few years, the most serious part of the author's study and reflection has been devoted to the subjects discussed in this book. These, briefly stated, are as follows. Firstly, that all mental or cerebral faculties can, by direct scientific treatment, be influenced to what would have once been regarded as miraculous action, and which is even yet very little known or considered. Secondly, in development of this theory, and as confirmed by much practical and personal experience, that the will can, by very easy processes of training or by aid of self-hypnotism or suggestion, be strengthened to any extent and states of mind soon induced, which can be made by practice habitual. Thus, as a man can by means of opium produce sleep, so can he by a very simple experiment, a few times repeated, an experiment which I clearly describe and which has been tested and verified beyond all denial, cause himself to remain during the following day in a perfectly calm or cheerful state of mind, and this condition may, by means of repetition and practice, be raised or varied to other states or conditions of a far more active or intelligent description. Thus, for illustration, I may say that within my own experience, I have by this process succeeded since my 70th year in working all day far more assiduously and without any sense of weariness or distaste for labor than I ever did at any previous period of my life. And the reader need only try the extremely easy experiment, as I have described it, to satisfy himself that he can do the same, that he can continue it with growing strength and infinitum, and that this power will unquestionably at some future time be employed with marvelous results in education. For beyond all question, since any human being can easily prove or disprove it by a few experiments, there is no method known by which inattention, heedlessness, or negligence in the young can be so promptly and thoroughly cured as by this. While on the other hand, attention and interest by assiduity are even more easily awakened. It has indeed seemed to me, since I have devoted myself to the study of education from this point of view, as if it had been like the iron castle in the Slavonian legend, unto which men had centuries wended their way by a long and wearisome road of many miles, while there was all the time, unseen and unknown, a very short and easy subterranean passage by means of which the dwellers in the schloss might have found their way to the town below and to the world in a few minutes. To this I have added a succinct account of what is, I believe, the easiest and most comprehensive art of memory ever conceived. There are on this subject more than 500 works, all based without exception on the associative system, which may be described as a stream which runs with great rapidity over a very short time, but is soon choked up. This, I believe, as a means applied to learning, was first published in my work entitled Practical Education. In it, the pupil is taught the direct method, that is, instead of remembering one thing by means of another, to impress the image itself on the memory and frequently revive it. This process soon becomes habitual and very easy. In from 1 year to 18 months, a pupil can by means of it accurately recall a lecture or sermon. It has the immediate advantage over all the associative systems of increasing and enlarging the scope and vigor of the memory, or indeed of the mind, so that it may truly bear as a motto, vires acquiri evundo. It gains in power as it runs along. Finally, I set forth a system of developing the constructive faculty, that which involves ingenuity, art, or manual making, as based on the teaching of the so-called minor arts to the young. The principle from which I proceed is that as the fruit is developed from the flower, all technical education should be anticipated or begun in children by practicing easy and congenial arts, such as light embroidery, wood carving, or repoussé, by means of which they become familiar with the elements of more serious and substantial work. Footnote 1. Mr. David Kay published about the same time a work in which memory was treated from the same point as mine. My work had been written for several years before it appeared in book form. It was, I sincerely believe, a marvelous coincidence. In the present work, I have radically reformed and greatly improved and facilitated the method by showing how it can be aided by self-hypnotism. Having found out by practical experience in teaching upwards of 2,000 children for several years that the practice of such easy work, or the development of the constructive faculty, invariably awakened the intellectual power or intelligence, I began to study the subject of the development of the mind in general. My first discovery after this was that memory, whether mental, visual, or of any other kind, could, in connection with art, be wonderfully improved, and to this in time came the consideration that the human will, with all its mighty power and deep secrets, could be disciplined and directed or controlled with as great care as the memory or the mechanical faculty. In a certain sense, the three are one, and the reader who will take the pains which are, I trust, not very great, to master the details of this book, will readily grasp it as a whole and understand that its contents from a system of education, yet one from which the old as well as young may profit. It is worth noting that, were it for nervous invalids alone, or those who from various causes find it difficult to sleep or apply the mind to work, this book would be of unquestionable value. In fact, even while writing this chapter, a lady has called to thank me for the substantial benefit which she derived from my advice in this respect. And mindful of the fact that attention and unwearied perseverance are most necessary to succeed in such processes as are here described, I have taken pains to show or explain how they may be rendered more attractive, tolerable, and habitual to the fickle or light-minded. This, too, being a subject which has been very little considered from a practical point of view. But above all things, I beg the reader, laying aside all prejudice or preconceived opinion, and neither believing nor disbelieving what he reads, to simply try it. That is, to test in his own person to what degree he can influence his will or bring about subsequent states of mind by the very easy process laid down. If I could hope that all opinion of my book would be uttered only by those who had thus put it to the test, I should be well assured as to its future. And also I beg all readers, and especially reviewers, to note that I advise that the hypnotizing process by aid of sleep shall be discontinued as soon as the experimenter begins to feel an increase in the power of the will. The whole subject of the system being to acquire a perfectly free, clear will as soon as possible. Great injustice was done as regards the first edition of this work by a very careless though eminent critic who blamed the author for not having done what the latter had carefully recommended in his book. There are 4 stages of advance towards the truth. Firstly, disbelief. Secondly, doubt, which is in fact only a fond advance towards disbelief. Thirdly, agnosticism, which is doubt mingled with inquiry. And finally, pure and simple inquiry or search, without any preconceived opinion or feeling whatever. It is, I trust, only in the spirit of the latter that I have written. Therefore, I say to the reader, neither believe nor disbelieve in anything which I have said, but, as it is an easy thing to try, experiment for yourself and judge by the result. In fact, as a satisfactory and conclusive experiment will not require more time, and certainly not half the pains which most people would expend on reading a book, I shall be perfectly satisfied if any or all of my critics will do so and judge the system by the result. Introduction. Unto many fortune comes while sleeping, a Latin proverb. Few know what is really going on in the world, American proverb. It is but a few years since it suddenly struck the gay world of comic dramatists and other literary wits that the 19th century was drawing to an end, and regarding it as an event, they began to make merry over it, at first in Paris and then in London and New York, as the fin de siècle. Unto them it was the going out of old fashions in small things, such as changes in dress, the growth of wealth, or the mighty bicycle, with a very prevalent idea that things are getting mixed or checkered, or the old conditions of life becoming strangely confused. And then men of more thought or intelligence, looking more deeply into it, began to consider that the phrase did in very truth express far more serious facts. As an old Norman tale, he who had entered as a jester or minstrel in comic garb laid aside his disguise and appeared as a wise counselor or brave champion who had come to free the imprisoned emperor. For it began to be seen that this fin de siècle was developing with startling rapidity changes of stupendous magnitude, which would ere long be seen careering with thunder speed along, and that all the revolutions and reforms recorded in history were only feeble or partial, scattered or small, compared to the worldwide unification of human interests, led by new lights, which has begun to manifest itself in every civilized country. That well nigh every person of real culture or education, guided by pure science, has within a very few years advanced to a condition of liberal faith which would have been in my university days generally reprobated as infidelity, is not to be denied, and the fact means, beyond all question, that according to its present rate of advance, in a very few years more, this reform will end in the annulling of innumerable traditions, forms of faith, and methods. Euphorsin is writ on the wall. More than this, is it not clear that art and romance, poetry and literature, as hitherto understood are felt, are neither to utterly vanish before the stupendous advances of science, or what is perhaps more probable, will, coalescing with it, take new forms, based on a general familiarity with all the old schools or types? A few years ago it seemed, as regarded all aesthetic creation, that man had exhausted the old models and knew not where to look for new. Now the aim of art is to interest or please by gratifying the sense or taste for the beautiful or human genius in making, also to instruct and refine, and it is evident that science is going to fulfill all these conditions on such a grand scale in so many new ways that, when men shall be once engaged in them, all that once gratified him in the past will seem as childish things to be put away before pursuits more worthy of manly dignity. If art, in all forms, has of the late been quiet, it has been because it has drawn back like the tiger in order to make the greater bound. One of the causes why some are laying aside all old spiritualism, romance, and sentiment is that their realization takes up too much time, and science, which is the soul of business, seeks in all things brevity and directness. It is probable that the phrase, "but to the point," has been oftener repeated during the past few years than it ever was before since time begun, of which directness I shall have more to say anon. And this is the end to which these remarks on the fin de siècle were written, to lay stress upon the fact that with the year 1900 we shall begin a century during which civilized mankind will attain its majority and become manly, doing that which is right as a man should, because it is right, and for no other reason, and shunning wrong for as good cause. For while man is a child, he behaves well or misbehaves, for reasons such as the fear of punishment or hope of a reward. But in a manly code, no reasons are necessary, but only a persuasion or conviction that anything is right or wrong, and a principle which is as the earth unto a seed. For as the world is going on or getting to be, it is very evident that it is a popularly said, he who will tell a lie will generally not hesitate to commit perjury. So he who cannot be really honest per se, without being sustained by principle based only on tradition and the opinion of others, is a poor creature, whose morality or honesty is in fact merely theatrical, or acted to satisfy certain conditions or exigencies from which he were better freed. This spirit of scientific directness and economy of thought and trouble by making the principle of integrity the basis of all forms and cutting all ethical theories down to be good because you ought is rapidly astonishing us with another marvelous fact which it illustrates, namely, that as in this axiom, as in man himself, there are latent undiscovered powers, so in 1,000 other sayings, or things known to us all, used by us all, and regarded as commonplace, there are astounding novelties and capacities as yet undreamed of. For, as very few moralists ever understood in full what is meant by the very much worn or hackneyed saying, "We ought to do what is right," so the world at large little suspects that such very desirable qualities as attention, interest, memory, and ingenuity have that within them which renders them far more attainable by man than has ever been supposed. Even the great problem of happiness itself, as really being only one of a relative state of mind, may be solved or reached by some far simpler or more direct method than any thinker has ever suggested. It all depends on exertion of the will. There are in this world a certain number of advanced thinkers who, if they knew how to develop the will which exists in them, could bring this reform to pass in an incredible short time. That is to say, they could place the doctrine or religion of honesty for its own sake so boldly and convincingly before the world that its future would be assured. Now, the man who can develop his will has it in his power not only to control his moral nature to any extent, but also to call into action or realize very extraordinary states of mind, that is, faculties, talents, or abilities which he has never suspected to be within his reach. It is a stupendous thought, yes, one so great that from the beginning of time to the present day no sage or poet has ever grasped it in its full extent. And yet it is a very literal truth that there lie hidden within us all, as in a sealed up spiritual casket, or like the bottled up djinn in the Arab tale, innumerable powers or intelligences, some capable of bestowing peace or calm, others of giving happiness, or inspiring creative genius, energy, and perseverance. All that man has ever attributed to an invisible world without lies, in fact, within him, and the magic key which will confer the faculty of sight and the power to conquer is the will. It has always been granted that it is a marvelously good thing to have a strong will, or a determined or resolute mind, and great has been the writing thereon. I have by me the last book on the subject, in which the faculty is enthusiastically praised, and the reader is told through all the inflections of sentiment that he ought to assert his will, to be vigorous in mind, etc. But unfortunately, how to do it is utterly wanting. It will be generally admitted by all readers that this how to do it has been always sought in grandly heroic or sublimely vigorous methods of victory over self. The very idea of being resolute, brave, persevering, or stubborn awakens in us all thoughts of conflict or dramatic self-conquering. But it may be far more effectively attained in a much easier way. Even as the ant climbed to the top of the tree and gnawed away and brought down the golden fruit unto which the man could not rise, there are easy methods, and by far the most effective, of awakening the will. Methods within the reach of everyone, and which, if practiced, will lead on ad infinitum to marvelous results. The following chapters will be devoted to setting forth, I trust, clearly and explicitly how, by an extremely easy process or processes, the will may be by any person of ordinary intelligence and perseverance awakened and developed to any extent, and with it many other faculties or states of mind. I can remember once being told by a lady that she thought there ought to be erected in all great cities temples to the will, so as to encourage mankind to develop the divine faculty. It has since occurred to me that an equal number of schoolhouses, however humble, in which the art of mastering the will by easy processes seriatim should be taught, would be far more useful. Such a schoolhouse is this work, and it is the hope of the author that all who enter, so to speak, or read it, will learn therefrom as much as he himself and others have done by studying its principles. To recapitulate or make clear and brief what I intend, I would say, firstly, that the advanced thinkers at this end of the century, weary of all the old indirect methods of teaching morality, are beginning to inquire, since duty is an indispensable condition, whether it is not just as well to do what is right, because it is right, as for any other reason. Secondly, that the spirit of directness, the result of evolution, is beginning to show itself in many other directions, as we may know by the great popularity of the answer to the question, how not to worry, which is, briefly, don't. Thirdly, that enlightened by the spirit of scientific straightforwardness, man is ceasing to seek for mental truth by means of roundabout metaphysical or conventional ethical methods based on old traditions and mysticism, and is looking directly in himself or materially for what immaterialism or idealism has really never explained at all. His discoveries having been within a few years much more valuable than all that a priori philosophy or psychology ever yielded since the beginning. And finally, that the leading faculties of powers of the mind, such as will, memory, the constructive faculty, and all which are subject to them, instead of being entirely mysterious gifts or inspirations bestowed on only a very few to any liberal extent, are in all and may be developed grandly and richly by direct methods which are, moreover, extremely easy, and which are in accordance with the spirit of the age, being the legitimate results of evolution and science. And that I may not be misunderstood, I would say that the doctrine of duty agrees perfectly with every form of religion. A man may be Roman Catholic, Church of England, Presbyterian, agnostic, or what he will. And if a form aids him in the least to be sincerely honest, it would be a pity for him to be without it. Truly, there are degrees and forms, and where I live in Italy, I am sorry to see so many abuses or errors in them. But to know and do what is right, when understood, is recognizing God as nearly as man can know him, and to do this perfectly we require will. It is the true Logos. Chapter 1. How to awaken attention and create interest as preparatory to developing the will. Quote, by the man of the family by sea raid. To the fairies, determination and goodwill, all things are possible. It happened recently to me, as I write, to see one afternoon lying on the sidewalk in the Via Calzaioli in Florence what I thought was a common iron screw, about 3 inches in length, which looked as if it had been dropped by some workman. And I, recalling the superstition that it is lucky to find such an object or a nail, I picked it up, and to my astonishment I found that it was a silver pencil case, but made to exactly resemble a screw. Hundreds of people had perhaps seen it, thought they knew all about it or what it was, and then passed it by, little suspecting it was real value. There is an exact spiritual parallel for this incident or parable of the screw pencil in innumerable ideas, at which well nigh everybody in the hurrying stream of life has glanced, yet no one has ever examined, until someone with a poetic spirit of curiosity or inspired by quaint superstition pauses, picks one up, looks into it, and finds that it has ingenious use and is far more than it appeared to be. Thus, if I declare that by special attention to a subject, earnestly turning it over and thinking deeply into it, very remarkable results will be produced as regards result in knowledge, every human being will assent to it as the veriest truism ever uttered, in the fullest belief that he or she assuredly knows all that. Yet it was not until within a few years that I discovered that this idea, which seemed so commonplace, had within it mysteries and meanings which were stupendously original or remarkable. I found that there was a certain intensity or power of attention, far surpassing ordinary observation, which we may, if we will, summon up and force on ourselves, just as we can by very special effort see or hear far better at times than usually. The Romans show by such a phrase as animum agicere and numerous proverbs and synonyms that they had learned to bend their attention energetically. They were good listeners, therefore keen observers. Footnote: such as endem rem semper urgere, indem incundem assidu tundere, attentas aures prevere, sedulo incumbere, etc. German and English books of synonyms in like manner indicate great intensity of attention. Learning to control or strengthen the will is closely allied to developing attention and interest, and for reasons which will soon be apparent, I will first consider the latter, since they constitute a preparation or basis for the former, and as a preliminary, I will consider the popular or common error to the effect that everyone has allotted to him or to her just so much of the faculty of attention or interest as it has pleased nature to give, the same being true as regards memory, will, the constructive or artistic abilities, and so on, when, in very truth and on the warrant of experience, all may be increased ad infinitum. Therefore, we find ignorant men complacently explaining their indifference to art and literature or culture on the ground that they take no interest in such subjects, as if interest were a special heaven-sent gift. Who has not heard the remark, "He or she takes such an interest in so many things, I wish that I could"? Or, as I heard it very recently expressed, "It must be delightful to be able to interest one's self in something at any time," which was much of the same as the expression of the Pennsylvania German girl, "Ah Gott, I wished I had genius and could make a pudding." No one can be expected to take an interest at once and by mere will in any subject, but where an earnest and serious attention has been directed to it, interest soon follows. Hence, it comes that those who deliberately train themselves in society after the precept enforced by all great writers of social maxims to listen politely and patiently are invariably rewarded by acquiring at last shrewd intelligence, as is well known to diplomatists. Footnote: I can remember how, one evening, an immensely respectable and wealthy but sadly ignorant gentleman said to his host, who was one of the most highly cultivated patrons of art in England, "You can't think how I envy you your interest in art and such matters. Now I, unfortunately, take no interest in them." That mere stolid patience subdues impatience sounds like a dull commonplace saying, but it is a silver pencil disguised as an iron screw. There is a deep subtlety hidden in it, if it be alloyed with a little intelligence, forethought, and determination towards a purpose. Let us now consider the mechanical and easy processes by which attention may be awakened. According to Ed von Hartmann, attention is either spontaneous or reflex. The voluntary fixing of our mind upon or choosing an idea, image, or subject is spontaneous attention. But when the idea for some reason impresses itself upon us, then we have enforced or reflex attention. That is simply to say, there is active or passive observation, the things which we seek or which come to us unsought. And the seeking for or spontaneous action can be materially aided and made persevering if, before we begin the search or set about devoting attention to anything, we pause, as it were, to determine or resolve that we will be thorough and not leave off till we shall have mastered it. For, strange as it may seem, the doing this actually has in most cases a positive and very often a remarkable result, as the reader may very easily verify for himself. This forethought is far more easily awakened or exerted than attention itself, but it prepares it just as attention prepares interest. Attention is closely allied to memory. When we would give attention to a subject for continued consideration, we must memorize it or it will vanish. Involuntary memory, excited by different causes, often compels us to attend to many subjects whether we will or not. Everyone has been haunted with images or ideas, even unto being tormented by them. There are many instances in which the imagination has given them objective form, and they have appeared visibly to the patient. These haunting ideas, disagreeable repetitions, or obstinate continuances assume an incredible variety of forms and enter in many strange ways into life. Monomania, or the being possessed with one idea to the exclusion of others, is a form of overstrained attention sustained by memory. It is enforced. Mere repetition of anything to almost anybody will produce remarkable results, or a kind of hypnotism causing the patient to yield to what becomes an irresistible power. Thus, it is said that perpetual dropping will wear away stones. Dr. James R. Koch, in his Hypnotism, in illustrating this, speaks of a man who did not want to sign a note. He knew that it was folly to do so, but yielded from having been over-persuaded. I have read a story in which a man was thus simply talked into sacrificing his property. The great power latent in this form of suggestiveness is well known to knaves in America, where it is most employed. This is the whole secret of the value of advertising. People yield to the mere repetition in time. Attention and interest may in this way be self-induced from repetition. It is true that an image or idea may be often repeated to minds which do not think or reflect without awakening attention. Per contra, the least degree of thought in a vast majority of cases forms a nucleus or beginning, which may easily be increased to an indefinite extent. A very little exertion of the will suffices in most cases to fix the attention on a subject, and how this can be done will be shown in another chapter. But in many cases, attention is attracted with little or no voluntary effort. On this fact is based the truth that, when or where it is desired, attention and interest may be awakened with great ease by a simple process. It may be remarked on the subject of repetition of images or ideas that a vast proportion of senseless superstitions, traditions, or customs which no one can explain originate in this way, and that, in fact, what we call habit, which ranks as second nature, is only another form or result of involuntary attention and the unconsciously giving a place in the memory to what we have heard. From the simple fact that even a man of plain common sense and strong will may be driven to sleeplessness or well nigh to madness by the haunting presence of some wretched trifle, some mere jingle or rhyme or idle memory, we may infer that we have here a great power which must in some way be capable of being led to great or useful results by some very easy process. I once wrote a sketch, never completed, in which I depicted a man of culture who, having lost an old manuscript book which he had regarded in a light, semi-incredulous manner as a fetish or amulet on which his luck depended, began to be seriously concerned, and awakening to the fact, deliberately cultivated his alarm as a psychological study, till he found himself, even with his eyes wide open as an observer, in terrible fear or a semi-monomaniac. The recovery of his lost charm at once relieved him. This was a diversion of attention for a deliberate purpose, which may have been varied ad infinitum to procure very useful results. But I have myself known a man in the United States who, having lost, he being an actor or performer, a certain article of theatrical properties on which he believed his luck depended, lost all heart and hope and fell into a decline from which he never recovered. In this, as in all such cases, it was not so much conviction or reason which influenced the sufferer as the mere effect of attention, often awakened till it had become what is known as a fixed idea. A deliberate reflection on what I have here advanced can hardly fail to make it clear to any reader that if he really desires to take an interest in any subject, It is possible to do so because nature has placed in every mind vast capacity for attention or fixing ideas. And where the attention is fixed, interest by equally easy process may always be induced to follow. And note that these preliminary preparations should invariably be as elementary and easily as possible, this being a condition which it is impossible to exaggerate. In a vast majority of cases, people who would feign to be known as taking an interest in art begin at the wrong end, or in the most difficult manner possible, by running through galleries where they only acquire a superficial knowledge of results and learn at best how to talk showily about what they have skimmed. Now, to this end, a good article in a cyclopedia or a small treatise like that of Taine's Aesthetic, thoroughly read and reread till it be really mastered, and then verified by study of a very few good pictures in a single collection, will do more to awaken sincere interest than the loose ranging through all the exhibitions in the world. I have read in many novels thrilling descriptions of the effect and results when all the glories of the Louvre or Vatican first burst upon some impassioned and unsophisticated youth who from that moment found himself an artist. But I still maintain that it would have been 100 times better for him had his attention and interest been previously attracted to a few pictures and his mind accustomed to reflect on them. Be the subject in which we would take an interest artistic or scientific, literary or social. The best way to begin therewith is to carefully read the simplest and easiest account of it which we can obtain, in order that we may know just exactly what it is or its definition. And this done, let the student at once, while the memory is fresh in mind, follow it up by other research or reading, observations, or inquiries on the same subject, for 3 books read together on anything will profit more than 100 at long intervals. In fact, a great deal of broken, irregular, or disjointed reading is often as much worse than none at all, as a little coherent study is advantageous. Many people would very willingly take an interest in many subjects if they knew how. It is a melancholy thing to see a man retired from business with literally nothing to do but fritter away his time on nothing, when he might be employed at something absorbing and useful. But they hesitate to act because, as is the rule in life, they see everything from its most difficult and repulsive side. There is no man who could not easily take an intelligent interest in art in some form, but I venture to say that a majority of even educated people who had never taken up the subject would be appalled at it in their secret hearts, or distrust its use or their own capacity to master it. Or again, many put no faith in easy manuals to begin with, believing in their ignorance that a mere collection of rudiments cannot have much in it. We are all surrounded by thousands of subjects in which we might all take an interest and do good work if we would, selecting one, give it a little attention, and by easy process proceed to learn it. As it is, in general society, the man or woman who has any special pursuit, accomplishment, or real interest for leisure hours, beyond idle gossip and empty time-killing, is a great exception. And yet I sincerely believe that in perhaps a majority of cases, there is a sincere desire to do something, which is killed by simple ignorance of the fact that with a very little trouble indeed, interest in something is within the easy reach of all. I have dwelt on this subject that the reader may be induced to reflect on the fact, firstly, that if he wishes to learn how to develop his will and strengthen it, it is absolutely necessary to take an interest in it. I beg him to consider how this art of acquiring attention and interest has been, or is, obscured in most minds, and the difficulties of acquiring it exaggerated. Secondly, I would point out that this method or process for making a will is so closely allied to that laid down for attention that it will seem like a deduction from it, both being allied to what may claim to be an original art of memory, to which I shall devote a chapter in its due place. For, as I hope clearly to prove, it is an easy matter to create a strong will or strengthen that which we have to a marvelous extent. Yet he who would do this must first give his attention firmly and fixedly to his intent or want, for which purpose it is absolutely necessary that he shall first know his own mind regarding what he means to do, and therefore meditate upon it, not dreamily or vaguely, but earnestly. And this done, he must assure himself that he takes a real interest in the subject, since, if such be the case, I may declare that his success is well nigh certain. And here it may be observed that if beginners, before taking up any pursuit, would calmly and deliberately consider the virtues of attention and interest, and how to acquire them, or bring them to bear on the proposed study or work, we should hear much less of those who had begun German without learning it, or who failed in any other attempt. For there would, in very truth, be few failures in life, if those who undertake anything first gave to it long and careful consideration by leading observation into every detail, and in fact, becoming familiar with the idea and not trusting to acquire interest and perseverance in the future. 9/10 of the difficulty and doubt or ill-at-easeness which beginners experience, giving them the frightened feeling of a cat in a strange garret, and which often inspires them to retreat, is due entirely to not having begun by training the attention or awakened an interest in the subject. It has often seemed to me that the reason for failure or the ultimate failing to attain success in a vast number of faith cures is simply because the people who seek them, being generally of a gushing, imaginative nature, are lacking in deep reflection, application, or earnest attention. They are quick to take hold and as quick to let go. Therefore, they are of all others the least likely to seriously reflect beforehand on the necessity of preparing the mind to patience and application. Now, it seems a simple thing to say, and it is therefore all the harder to understand that before going to work at anything which will require perseverance and repeated effort, we can facilitate the result amazingly by thinking over and anticipating it, so that when the weariness comes, it will not be as a discouraging novelty, but as something, of course, even as a fisherman accepts his wet feet or the mosquitoes. But how this disposition to grow weary of work or to become inattentive may be literally and very completely conjured away will be more fully explained in another chapter. For this, let it suffice to say that earnest forethought, and the more of it the better, bestowed on aught which we intend to undertake, is a thing rarely attempted in the real sense in which I mean it, but which, when given, eases every burden and lightens every toil. Mere forethought repeated is the easiest of mental efforts, yet even a little of it asserted before undertaking a task will wonderfully facilitate the work. Hypnotism, says Dr. James R. Koch, can be used to train the attention of persons habitually inattentive. But, in fact, forethinking in any way is the minor of initiatory stage of hypnotism. Both are gradual persuasion of the nervous system into habit. And on this text a marvelous sermon could be preached, which, if understood, would sink deeply into every heart, inspiring some while alarming others, but greatly cheering the brave. And it is this: there are millions of people who suffer from irritability, want of self-control, loquacity, evil in many forms, or nerves, who would fain control themselves and stop it all. Moralists think that for this it is enough to convince their reason, but this rarely avails. A man may know that he is wrong, yet not be able to reform. Now, what he wants is to have his attention fixed long enough to form a new habit. Find out how this can be done, and it may, in many cases, be the simplest and most mechanical thing in the world to cure him. Men have been frightened by a scarecrow into thorough repentance. A question of a few vibrations of ether, more or less, makes for us all the difference between perception and non-perception, or between sight and blindness. Accustom any such moral invalid to being hypnotized, or willed a few times into a calm, self-controlled state, and the habit may be formed. And to those who doubt, and perhaps would sneer, I have only to say, try it. It will do them good. End of chapter 1. All right, let's move on and find out what else is in store in developing a strong will. Leave me your comment, let me know you were here, and I'll meet you at the next video for chapter 2.